Welcome to Silent Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now let's dive right into the story.
The CEO brought his mistress to the divorce meeting and told his wife to take $10 million quietly. His wife did not cry. She did not ask him to reconsider. She simply picked up the pen, crossed out his last name, and signed with the one name he should have feared from the beginning. Vivian Ashburn. The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then her husband's empire began to fall. Chapter 1 Grant Sterling had spent 12 years teaching the world to admire him. At 42, he was the kind of man business magazines loved to photograph from below. With city lights behind him and confidence sharpened into something almost violent. He owned Sterling Vector, an artificial intelligence logistics company valued at $9 billion. He had a penthouse in Manhattan, a glass office in San Francisco, a private jet with his initials stitched into the cream leather seats, and a smile that made investors forgive almost anything. What he did not have anymore was patience for the quiet woman who had once sat beside him on the floor of a rented apartment, eating cold noodles while he promised he would build something worthy of her faith. Vivian Sterling stood alone near the orchid wall at Sterling Vector's anniversary gala, holding a glass of untouched sparkling water. She was 37, slender, composed, and dressed in a midnight blue silk gown with no visible label. Her dark auburn hair was pinned low at the nape of her neck. Her makeup was soft enough to be mistaken for plainness by people who only understood beauty when it shouted. Around her, the ballroom of the Langham glittered with cameras, champagne, and the metallic laughter of people who knew their own net worth down to the decimal. On the stage, a massive screen looped Grant's face beside phrases like visionary, disruptor, and the future of global commerce. Vivian watched the screen without blinking. She had helped write the first pitch deck for that future. She had sat through the early investor calls when no one took Grant seriously. She had listened to him scream into pillows after failed demos. She had wired money through a shell trust when his payroll almost collapsed in year 2. And now she was standing at his gala while a woman in a scarlet gown wore the diamond necklace Vivian had found on Grant's credit card statement last month. Camille Laurent moved through the crowd like she owned every light in the room. She was Sterling Vector's chief financial officer, 31, blonde, glossy, and practiced in the art of looking intimate without touching too much in public. Her scarlet dress cut sharply across one shoulder. Her lipstick matched the wine in her hand. When she reached Grant, she leaned close enough for her perfume to blend with his cologne. Grant looked down at Camille and smiled. It was not the boardroom smile, not the investor smile. It was the smile Vivian used to receive before fame taught him to ration tenderness. A photographer called, "Mr. Sterling, over here." Grant placed a hand at Camille's waist. Vivian felt the motion like a door closing inside her chest. Camille glanced toward Vivian across the ballroom. Her eyes paused on the plain silk gown, then lifted in slow amusement, as if she were looking at a housekeeper who had wandered into the wrong event. She whispered something to Grant. Grant's smile tightened, but he did not move his hand. The photographer captured them together beneath the anniversary banner. Grant Sterling and Camille Laurent, golden under the lights, looking like a king, and the woman he had chosen to stand beside his throne. An older investor, near Vivian, murmured to his wife, "Isn't that his spouse over there?" The wife lowered her voice. "The quiet one? I thought they were separated." Vivian looked at her water glass. The surface was perfectly still. That was what people misunderstood about silence. They thought it meant surrender. Sometimes it was simply the sound of a blade being drawn slowly enough that no one noticed. Grant finally approached her 20 minutes later, not because he wanted to, but because a senator's wife had asked where Mrs. Sterling was. His expression was controlled irritation wrapped in public polish. "Vivian," he said, "try to look engaged. This is an important night. I have spoken to 3 investors, the mayor, and your head of product," she replied evenly. Grant's jaw flexed. "That is not what I mean." "No," she said. "You mean I should sparkle beside you while you let your CFO wear the necklace you bought with marital funds." For 1 second, his eyes flashed. Not with shame, with annoyance that she had noticed. "This is not the place," he said. Camille appeared at his side before Vivian could answer. Up close, the necklace was even more vulgar than it had looked in the receipt, a river of diamonds designed less for beauty than announcement. "Grant, darling," Camille said, touching his sleeve. "The press wants one more photo before your speech." Darling. The word landed between wife and mistress with a softness that made it more brutal. Grant did not correct her. Vivian watched his face. She gave him one final chance to remember himself. He looked past her toward the cameras. "Go home if you're going to make this difficult," he said under his breath. "I need people around me who understand momentum." Camille's mouth curved. Vivian's fingers tightened around the glass, then relaxed. "Momentum," she repeated softly. Grant was already turning away. He climbed the stage minutes later with Camille seated in the front row, in the chair marked Mrs. Sterling. Vivian saw the small white name card under Camille's clutch. Her own place card had been moved to a side table near the service door. The humiliation was deliberate. Grant began his speech under a wash of white light. He spoke about loyalty, vision, and the people who had stood beside him from the beginning. When the crowd applauded, Camille lifted her chin as if the words belonged to her. Vivian did not interrupt. She did not storm out. She took one photograph of the seating chart, one photograph of Camille in her chair, and one photograph of Grant's hand resting briefly on Camille's shoulder as he left the stage. Then she sent all 3 images to a contact saved only as Graves. The reply came less than a minute later. Understood. I will prepare the file. Vivian put away her phone and walked out through the side exit before dessert was served. Behind her, Grant accepted another standing ovation. He had no idea that the woman leaving through the service corridor owned the company that insured his servers, financed his first patents, controlled half his suppliers, and had just stopped protecting him. Chapter 2. Grant came home after midnight smelling of champagne and Camille's jasmine perfume. Vivian was in the library, still wearing the blue gown, reading a leather-bound book she had not turned a page of in 30 minutes. Their townhouse overlooked Central Park. Grant had bought it 3 years earlier and given interviews about how it symbolized his arrival. He liked to say every inch of it had been earned through discipline. Vivian had never corrected him. The down payment had come from a trust account his accountants never knew existed. Grant stopped in the doorway when he saw her awake. "I thought you'd be asleep," he said. "You thought wrong." He gave a short, humorless laugh and loosened his tie. "Are we doing this tonight?" Vivian closed the book. "You let your mistress sit in my chair." Grant's expression hardened, but he did not deny the word. "Camille is my CFO. That table was for executive leadership." The name card said Mrs. Sterling. He looked toward the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, turning his face into something fractured. Maybe the name card was ahead of schedule, he said. For a moment Vivian felt the old pain rise, not sharp anymore. Heavy, familiar. The pain of watching someone destroy a house and complain about the dust. "Say what you came home to say, Grant." He exhaled as if she had inconvenienced him by being calm. "I want a divorce." The words did not surprise her. That was the saddest part. "When?" she asked. His eyes narrowed. "That's it? Would tears improve your offer?" Grant stared at her, searching for the weak spot he was used to pressing. Vivian had once softened when he grew cold. She had once apologized just to end the silence. She had once believed love required endurance. That woman had been buried slowly, insult by insult, lie by lie. "My lawyers have prepared a generous settlement," he said. $10 million. The beach house in Montauk. 2 cars. Jewelry you currently possess. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, waive future claims, and make this painless. For whom? For both of us. No, Vivian said. For you and Camille. His mouth tightened. Don't drag her into this. Vivian almost smiled. Men like Grant always called it dragging when their secrets were named out loud. You brought her into my seat, she said. You brought her into our marriage. I am only acknowledging the furniture, Grant took a step into the room. His face, so polished for cameras, showed something uglier now. Impatience. Contempt. Relief, too, because he believed the hard part was over. "You and I haven't been partners in years," he said. "You don't understand my life anymore. The speed, the pressure, the scale. Camille does. Camille understands your balance sheet. She understands ambition." Vivian stood. The movement was quiet, but Grant paused. Something in her posture had changed. She was not bracing for impact. She was measuring distance. "You are right about one thing," she said. "We are no longer partners." Grant's shoulders loosened. He mistook her agreement for defeat. "Good," he said. "Come to my office tomorrow at 10. We'll sign privately." "Privately?" He looked away. "Camille will be there." Vivian let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Grant cleared his throat. "She has to review the financial implications." "Of your marriage. Of my company." "Of course," Vivian said. Her voice was so mild that Grant frowned. "Don't make this dramatic." "I won't." He studied her for another moment, then turned to leave. "Vivian," he said from the doorway. She looked at him. "Take the 10 million. Pride won't pay for your life." She thought of the Ashbourne vaults beneath Geneva, the shipping fleets registered under shell names, the mines in Chile, the data centers in Norway, the private foundation that could buy Sterling Vector before breakfast and forget the cost by lunch. "No," she said, "but truth usually collects interest." Grant shook his head as if she had said something foolish. After he left, Vivian walked to the desk and opened the lower drawer. Inside was a slim black phone she had not used in 2 years. Only 3 numbers were saved on it. She called the first. A man's voice answered on the second ring, clipped, British, and awake despite the hour. "Miss Ashbourne." "Mr. Graves," Vivian said. "He asked for the divorce." There was a pause. "And the mistress?" "In my chair tonight, in his office tomorrow." "Then we proceed?" Vivian looked around the library, at the home where she had made herself smaller so Grant could feel enormous. "Yes," she said. "But do not touch him yet. Let him sign first." "Understood." "And Graves?" "Yes, Miss Ashbourne." Her eyes moved to the wedding photograph on the mantel. Grant looked young in it. Hungry, human. She had loved that version enough to hide a kingdom behind her back. "After tomorrow," she said. "Remove the foundation." Chapter 3 Grant's office occupied the top floor of Sterling Tower, a blade of glass rising over San Francisco like an accusation. Vivian arrived at exactly 10. She wore a cream coat, black trousers, and pearl earrings no one in the building would recognize as part of the Ashbourne private collection. Her hair was smooth. Her face was bare of any visible distress. The receptionist looked startled to see her. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, "I wasn't told you were coming." "Few people are told what matters," Vivian replied, not unkindly. The elevator took her to the executive floor without stopping. Grant's assistant opened the door with the stiff expression of a person who knew too much and wanted no part of it. Inside, Grant sat behind his marble desk. Camille sat on the sofa, not beside the desk, not at the conference table. On the sofa, legs crossed, espresso cup in hand, wearing a white suit that looked bridal by design. Vivian paused at the threshold. Camille's smile was small and bright. "Vivian," she said, "thank you for being punctual. Grant has a board call at 11. Grant did not reprimand her. Vivian stepped inside and closed the door. "I was under the impression this was a divorce meeting," she said. "It is," Grant replied. "Camille is here as CFO." "How efficient," Vivian said. "Most mistresses wait until after the wife leaves to inspect the furniture." Camille's smile flickered. Grant's palm hit the desk. Not hard enough to be violence. Hard enough to announce control. Enough. Vivian looked at his hand, then at his face. He misread her quiet as fear. "Sit down," he said. She sat. Grant pushed a folder across the desk. The folder was thick, cream-colored, expensive. His lawyers had made humiliation look tasteful. "The settlement is inside," he said. 10 million. Montauk House. Vehicles. Jewelry. Standard NDA. Standard non-disparagement clause. You will not speak to the press, write a memoir, imply misconduct, or interfere with Sterling Vector's public image. Camille leaned forward, her diamond necklace catching the office light. It is more than fair, she said. Honestly, Vivian, most women in your position would be grateful. Vivian turned her head. My position? Camille's eyes gleamed. No career, no independent platform, no financial sophistication. Grant is being kind. Grant looked faintly pleased, as if Camille had said aloud what he preferred to disguise as generosity. Vivian opened the folder. She did not read the numbers. She read the tone. The agreement wanted silence. It wanted disappearance. It wanted to turn 12 years of loyalty into a line item and bury every insult beneath a wire transfer. There is a clause preventing me from discussing adultery, Vivian said. Grant's eyes hardened. It protects all parties. No, it protects guilty ones. Camille set her cup down. This is exactly why Grant needs a cleaner future. You always make everything personal. Vivian looked at Camille's necklace. Did you know the diamonds were charged to a joint account? Camille's throat moved. Grant stood. I said enough. And I heard you. Vivian closed the folder and placed both hands on top of it. I will give you the divorce. Grant exhaled. Camille's shoulders relaxed. However, Vivian continued, I will not take your $10 million. I will not take the Montauk house. I will not take your cars. I will not sign your NDA. And I will not pretend your mistress is a financial advisor. Grant stared. Don't be stupid. That is advice you should have taken before inviting her here. His face darkened. If you refuse the settlement, you leave with nothing. Then that should comfort you. Grant came around the desk slowly. You have no idea how ugly this can get. Vivian remained seated. I know exactly how ugly men become when they confuse borrowed power with ownership. Camille gave a brittle laugh. Borrowed power? Vivian, he built a $9 billion company while you arranged flowers and attended charity lunches. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Camille's laugh died. Miss Laurent, Vivian said, do not mistake proximity to a powerful man for power. It is a common error, but an expensive one. The room went cold. Grant stepped between them. My lawyers will send the revised papers, he said. If you want to walk away empty to make a point, fine. But once this is signed, don't come crawling back. Vivian stood and picked up her portfolio. Have your counsel contact mine. Grant frowned. Your counsel? Jonathan Graves. Camille blinked. She did not know the name. Grant did not either. That made Vivian feel, for the first time all morning, almost amused. What firm? Grant demanded. He does not need one. She moved toward the door. Vivian, Grant snapped. She turned. When this is over, you will realize you chose pride over security. Vivian looked at the man who had once promised never to let success change the way he held her hand. No, Grant, she said. When this is over, you will realize I was the security. Then she left him standing beside his mistress, in the office built on money he never knew came from her. Chapter 4. The divorce was finalized 3 days later in a private conference room at Halpern and Vale, Grant's preferred law firm. Grant arrived with Camille. He told himself it was because the settlement affected company optics. The truth was less polished. He wanted Vivian to see the replacement. He wanted her to understand the future had already chosen someone else. Camille wore pale pink and carried a crocodile handbag large enough to hold the dignity she had never used. Vivian arrived with Jonathan Graves. The effect on the room was immediate. Graves was in his late 60s, silver-haired, narrow-eyed, and tailored with the kind of restraint only old money respected. He did not introduce himself loudly. He did not shake hands first. He simply placed a slim leather folder on the table and sat beside Vivian as if he had attended the downfall of men like Grant many times before breakfast. Grant's lawyer, Peter Halpern, glanced at him and stiffened. Mr. Graves, he said. Grant noticed the change. You know him? Halpern adjusted his glasses. By reputation. Camille looked annoyed. Can we begin? Grant has calls. Graves turned his eyes to her. Then let us be brief. His voice was quiet, but the room obeyed it. Halpern slid the documents forward. Mrs. Sterling has waived all financial claims, including spousal support, marital property division, and any interest in Mr. Sterling's corporate holdings. In exchange, Mr. Sterling agrees to immediate dissolution with no NDA attached. Grant smiled faintly. He still believed he was winning. Vivian, he said, almost kindly, last chance. Take the money. Once you sign, I don't want to hear from you again. Camille touched his wrist. The gesture was meant for Vivian. Vivian saw it. She let Camille have the performance. Some people needed applause before execution. I do not want your money, Vivian said. Grant leaned back. Fine. He signed first, fast and hard, the pen slashing across the page as if he were cutting a rope. Grant Sterling. Camille smiled at the signature. Vivian took the pen Graves offered her. It was black, old, and heavier than Grant's gold Mont Blanc. For 12 years, she had signed school donations, museum guest books, household receipts, and charity pledges as Vivian Sterling. A soft name. A married name. A name designed to make powerful people stop looking too closely. She placed the pen on the line. Vivian Ashbourne. Peter Halpern stopped breathing for a beat. Grant did not notice. He was checking his phone. Camille noticed Halpern's face. Is there a problem? She asked. Graves collected the papers before anyone could touch them. No problem, he said. The marriage is dissolved. Vivian stood. Grant looked up only then. That's it? That is usually what a signature means, she said. His eyes narrowed at her tone. Enjoy your pride. Vivian buttoned her coat. Enjoy your freedom. She walked out with Graves beside her. The elevator doors had barely closed behind them when Grant's phone began vibrating. Once. Twice. Then continuously. Camille checked her own phone and frowned. Grant. What? Sterling Vector just dropped 8%. Grant laughed once, sharp and dismissive. Market noise. The conference room door opened. Lena Ortiz, Sterling Vector's chief operating officer, rushed in with her hair coming loose from its bun and an iPad clutched to her chest. Grant, we have a crisis. His smile faded. The Meridian acquisition? He asked. Sterling Vector had spent 6 months preparing to acquire Meridian Grid, a European microchip logistics firm that owned routing patents Grant needed to dominate the next decade of AI supply chain infrastructure. Lena's lips were pale. It's gone. What do you mean gone? A Luxembourg holding company bought controlling voting rights 20 minutes ago. They outbid us by 45% and paid cash. Camille stood. That is impossible. Nobody had that liquidity ready. Lena looked from Camille to Grant. The filing names the parent entity. Grant felt something cold touch the back of his neck. Say it. Ashbourne Global. The room went silent. Peter Halpern slowly removed his glasses. Grant looked at the closed elevator doors. Vivian Ashbourne. He had heard the name Ashbourne before, of course. Everyone who mattered had. Not from Forbes lists or television interviews. The Ashbournes did not perform wealth. They owned the things public billionaires depended on. Ports, mineral rights, aerospace components, private credit lines, undersea fiber, insurance syndicates, sovereign debt, data centers buried in mountains. A shadow empire, people called it. Worth more than $3 trillion by conservative estimates. Grant's mouth went dry. No, he said. His phone buzzed again. Another alert. Then another. Lena swallowed. 3 Asian hardware suppliers have terminated their expansion contracts. They paid the penalty clauses in full. Our cloud build-out for next quarter is dead. Camille grabbed the iPad. On what grounds? Strategic relocation. Who owns them? Grant asked, though the answer was already moving through him like poison. Lena looked at him with something close to pity. Ashbourne subsidiaries. Grant sat down slowly. 10 minutes earlier, he had signed away a wife he believed had no power. Now his acquisition was dead, his stock was bleeding, and his supply chain had begun to vanish in the exact shape of her silence. Chapter 5. By Monday morning, Sterling Tower felt less like a headquarters and more like a hospital waiting room. People walked quickly, spoke softly, and stared at screens with faces drained of color. The stock had fallen 23% in 2 trading days. Analysts who had called Grant a generational founder on Friday now used words like exposure, dependency, and structural vulnerability. Grant stood in the war room surrounded by executives who no longer looked at him as if he were inevitable. "Find alternatives," he ordered. Lena Ortiz looked exhausted. Quote, "We are trying. The problem is not one supplier. It is the entire chain. The rare earth contracts, the server insurance, the cold storage facilities, the trans-Pacific shipping priority, the chip fabrication queue. Every piece touches an Ashburn entity somewhere." Grant slammed a hand onto the table. "They can't just cut us off." "They can," Lena said. "They are honoring termination clauses and paying penalties. Legally, they are clean." Camille sat near the end of the table, scrolling through investor messages. Her face was tight beneath a layer of perfect makeup. "BlackRock reduced exposure," she said. "Vanguard is reviewing. Apollo won't take our call." Grant turned on her. "You told me the street loved our position. Before your ex-wife turned out to be a private empire." The words left her mouth too fast. Everyone heard them. Grant's eyes sharpened. "Careful." Camille straightened. "I am trying to save the company." "Then save it." "With what?" She snapped. "Our acquisition capital is trapped. Our credit line is under review. Our suppliers are leaving. And apparently, the woman you humiliated in front of me was connected to every asset we were too arrogant to map." The room froze. Grant's face went white with fury. "Get out," he said. Camille stood, trembling with rage, but she did not leave. She knew walking out now would look like surrender. She also knew staying beside him no longer felt like ascending. That evening, Grant called Vivian for the first time since the divorce. She did not answer. He called again. No answer. On the third call, a male voice answered. "Mr. Sterling," Graves said. "Miss Ashbourne is unavailable." Grant stood in his office overlooking the city, one hand pressed to the glass. "I need to speak with my wife." "You have no wife." The sentence landed cleanly. Grant closed his eyes. "Tell Vivian this has gone far enough." "Has it?" "She is damaging thousands of employees." "Your concern for collateral damage is newly developed." Grant's fingers curled against the glass. "I want a meeting." "Miss Ashbourne has no interest in reconciliation. This is business." "Yes," Graves said. "That is why she is so calm." The line disconnected. Grant stared at the phone. For the first time in years, he had no one to command. Across the Atlantic, Vivian sat in the private study of Ashbourne House, a stone estate outside London older than several nations' banking systems. Rain tapped against the windows. A fire burned low in the grate. The room smelled of cedar, leather, and old paper. Across from her sat her father, Malcolm Ashbourne. Malcolm was 70, tall even seated, with silver hair and eyes the color of winter steel. He had the stillness of a man who had never needed to raise his voice because the world leaned closer when he spoke softly. "He called?" Malcolm asked. 3 times. "Good. Panic is the first honest emotion men like Grant Sterling ever show." Vivian looked into her tea. "I did love him once. Her father studied her, not unkindly." "I know." "He was different then." "No," Malcolm said. "He was smaller then. Small men often look gentle before they are handed height." Vivian's mouth tightened. She wanted to disagree. Some loyal part of her still wanted to protect the memory of the man who had danced with her barefoot in a kitchen the size of Grant's current closet. But memory was not evidence. Evidence was Camille in her chair. Grant's NDA. The settlement folder. The years of being introduced as my wife with the same tone one might use for a decorative vase. Vivian set down her cup. "I don't want to destroy employees." "Then don't," Malcolm said. "Build something better and hire the ones worth saving." She slid a folder across his desk. Malcolm opened it. Ashburn Horizon. A fully integrated logistics intelligence platform, built not on rented suppliers and inflated press releases, but on the physical infrastructure Ashburn Global already owned: ports, warehouses, autonomous fleet routes, chip allocation, weather models, customs data, insurance pricing, and quantum secure routing. For years, Vivian had watched Sterling Vector from the inside. She knew the weak points. She knew which teams built real value and which executives only built noise. She knew Grant had stopped improving the product once investors started rewarding the mythology. Malcolm read the first 3 pages in silence. Then he looked up. You could have done this years ago. I was married years ago. And now? Vivian's eyes were steady. Now I am awake. For the first time that evening, Malcolm smiled. How much funding do you require? Initial deployment, $5 billion. Expansion, 12. Acquisition reserve, 3. Approved. You haven't finished reading. I am not investing in the folder, he said. I am investing in my daughter returning to herself. Vivian looked away for a moment. The firelight moved over her face, softening nothing, revealing everything. Then let's move quickly. Malcolm closed the folder. How quickly? Vivian thought of Grant telling her she did not understand momentum. Fast enough for him to feel the wind change before he sees the storm. Chapter 6. The World Infrastructure Summit in Geneva was supposed to save Grant. At least that was what Camille told him on the flight over, while reviewing lists of private credit firms willing to meet distressed but salvageable companies. Grant hated the word distressed. He hated the way people looked at him now, as if his suit remained expensive, but his future had been marked down. The summit occupied a lakeside hotel wrapped in glass and marble. It was the sort of event where ministers shook hands with shipping heirs, tech founders hunted sovereign wealth, and journalists waited near exits for faces that looked frightened enough to photograph. Grant arrived with Camille on his arm. He had considered not bringing her, but pride made stupid decisions when cornered. The press had begun whispering about his divorce, about the CFO in the front row, about the mysterious Ashbourne retaliation. If he arrived alone, people would smell weakness. So Camille came. She wore black this time, severe and expensive. But her hand on his arm was tense. Her eyes kept scanning the room for better exits. Smile, Grant muttered. I am smiling. You look like you're attending a deposition. We might be, by next month. He shot her a warning look. Then the ballroom changed. It happened before the announcement. Conversations thinned. Heads turned toward the grand staircase. Phones rose, not with the chaotic hunger of paparazzi, but with the disciplined interest of people who recognized power entering the room. Grant looked up. Vivian stood at the top of the stairs, not Vivian Sterling. Vivian Ashbourne. She wore a deep green gown structured like armor, with clean lines and a narrow gold collar at her throat. Her auburn hair fell in polished waves over one shoulder. No necklace, no borrowed sparkle. She did not need decoration to prove she belonged. 2 security officers stood behind her. Beside her was a white-haired man Grant recognized from newspapers he pretended not to read. Malcolm Ashbourne. The room responded to him like gravity had shifted. Grant felt Camille's hand slip from his arm. That's her father, Camille whispered. Vivian descended the staircase slowly, not for drama, but because everyone moved aside before she reached them. The chairman of a European bank bowed his head. A cabinet minister kissed her cheek. The CEO of a shipping conglomerate, who had ignored Grant's calls all week, stepped forward to greet her with visible warmth. Grant stood frozen. This was impossible, even after everything. The mind accepts facts more slowly when ego stands in the doorway. Camille's voice trembled. Grant, did you know? He did not answer. He pushed through the crowd toward Vivian. Several people watched him come. That was the worst part. Not the panic, not the humiliation, but the sudden awareness that he was no longer moving through admirers. He was moving through witnesses. Vivian, he said when he reached her. She turned. Her expression was polite, distant, almost curious. Grant. He hated the calm in her voice. We need to talk. No, she said. One word. No anger, no performance, just a wall. His face tightened. You don't get to dismantle my company and then refuse a conversation. Vivian looked at Camille, who stood a few steps behind him, pale beneath her contour. Interesting, Vivian said. Camille had no difficulty joining conversations about dismantling my marriage. Camille's lips parted. Grant lowered his voice. This isn't about her. It was when you put her in my chair. The people nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Grant felt heat climb his neck. I made mistakes. You made choices. I was angry. I felt trapped. For the first time, Vivian's eyes sharpened. Trapped, she repeated. In a home I helped buy, in a company I helped save, in a marriage where I reduced myself year after year so your reflection could fill every room? Grant swallowed. I didn't know. No, she said. You didn't ask. Camille stepped forward, desperation giving her courage. Vivian, if this is about the divorce meeting, I regret the tone. But Sterling Vector employs thousands. Surely we can reach a business arrangement. Vivian turned to her. Miss Laurent, you sat on my sofa and told me to be grateful for scraps from a table built with my money. You are not qualified to discuss arrangements with me. Camille flushed scarlet. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. Grant's voice cracked through his composure. What do you want? Vivian looked at him for a long second. Nothing from you. That frightened him more than rage would have. Before he could speak, the host of the summit stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Tonight, Ashbourne Global will announce a new platform that will reshape the infrastructure of modern commerce. Grant's stomach dropped. Vivian stepped past him. He caught her wrist. Not hard, but enough. The two security officers moved instantly. Vivian looked down at his hand. Grant released her as if burned. Don't do this, he whispered. Her gaze lifted to his. You did this. I am only refusing to keep paying for it. Then she walked to the stage. The applause began before she reached the microphone. Grant stood beside Camille as Vivian addressed the room in a voice calm enough to be lethal. For too long, Vivian said, global logistics intelligence has been sold by companies that do not own ports, fleets, energy reserves, chip access, or physical risk. They sell prediction without responsibility. Ashburn Horizon will change that. Behind her, the screen filled with moving lines of ships, warehouses, satellites, custom systems, and server networks. Grant watched his own business model become obsolete in real time. Vivian did not mention Sterling Vector. She did not have to. By the time the presentation ended, 3 of Grant's largest clients had requested private meetings with Ashburn Horizon. Camille saw the notifications before he did. Her face went blank. FedEx is leaving, she said. Grant stared at the stage. Vivian was surrounded now by ministers, investors, and clients who had not returned his calls. The cameras caught him in the background. For the first time in his career, Grant Sterling was not the subject of the photograph. He was the cautionary detail. Chapter 7. 2 months later, Sterling Tower had stopped pretending. The espresso bar in the lobby was closed. Half the lights on the engineering floors stayed dark. The cafeteria offered coffee in paper urns instead of the chef-curated menus Grant had once used as proof that genius deserved luxury. Employees spoke in careful voices. The stock traded below $6. Grant sat alone in his office with his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, and 4 days of exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. The magazines on his wall now looked cruel. Visionary. Titan. The man who moves the world. The world had moved without him. His door opened. Camille entered, carrying a cardboard box. Grant stared at it. No. She set a white envelope on his desk. My resignation. He stood so quickly his chair rolled back into the credenza. You are the CFO. Not after 5 o'clock. We have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Then you should find someone who still believes there will be a board next quarter. Grant looked at the box in her hands. Designer heels. A framed photo from the gala. The diamond necklace was not on her throat today. You're leaving now? Camille's expression hardened with the ugly honesty of a person abandoning a sinking ship. KKR offered me a role. A role? Senior risk analyst? Grant laughed once, disbelieving. You would take a demotion? A demotion is better than being attached to your collapse. The words struck him harder than he expected. My collapse, he said. You stood beside me when I told Vivian to sign. You pushed the NDA. You told me she was dead weight. Because you told me she was nobody. Silence. Camille's eyes glittered, not with tears, but with anger at the inconvenience of consequences. You said she had no money, no leverage, no family that mattered. You said she was a quiet little wife who would take the check and disappear. Grant's mouth twisted. So this is my fault? Isn't it? He stepped around the desk. You wanted her chair. I wanted the life you advertised. You wore her diamonds. You bought them. They stared at each other, and for the first time Grant saw Camille clearly, not as the glamorous proof of his desirability, not as ambition in a red dress, just a woman who had mistaken his borrowed empire for a secure elevator. She picked up the box. Good luck in bankruptcy court, Grant. Camille, she paused. His voice was lower now. Did you ever love me? Camille looked at him as if the question were childish. I loved winning. Then she left. Grant stood in the center of his office, alone with the truth he had purchased at full price. The board meeting lasted 18 minutes. The directors did not shout. That would have been kinder. They spoke in professional tones about fiduciary duty, strategic alternatives, asset preservation, and leadership transition. Every polished phrase meant the same thing. They wanted him removed. By evening, Grant Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Vector, was suspended from operational control pending restructuring. He went home to the townhouse overlooking Central Park. The staff had already left. Creditors had sent notices. Art appraisers were scheduled for the morning. He walked into the library and stopped before the wedding photograph on the mantel. Vivian had not taken it. In the picture, she was smiling at him instead of the camera, young, trusting, unprotected. Grant picked up the frame. For a moment, something like grief moved through him. Then his phone buzzed. A headline filled the screen. Ashburn Horizon signs 5-year global contract with Maersk, DHL, and Northline Freight, 3 former Sterling Vector clients. Grant threw the phone across the room. It struck the wall beneath the wedding photo and fell face down on the rug. The glass cracked. The photograph did not. Chapter 8 bankruptcy court did not smell like defeat. That surprised Grant. It smelled like floor polish, paper, and burnt coffee. Ordinary smells. Bureaucratic smells. As if entire empires did not come here to be measured, stripped, and sold. Grant sat at the petitioner's table beside Peter Halpern, who looked older every time he opened a new folder. The Chapter 11 restructuring was their last chance. If the judge approved the plan, Sterling Vector could survive as a smaller licensing company. Grant might lose control, but he would keep enough of the business to rebuild. The patents, Halpern insisted, were still valuable. The core routing intelligence could be licensed to mid-market clients not yet absorbed by Ashburn Horizon. Grant clung to that thought. He had lost the suppliers, the clients, the valuation, the mistress, the board's trust, and most of his reputation. But surely he still owned what he had built. Surely. The judge reviewed the documents over half-moon glasses. Mr. Halpern, your plan depends heavily on Sterling Vector retaining full rights to its foundational routing patents. Yes, Your Honor, Halpern said. Those patents remain the company's most valuable assets. Grant sat straighter. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Jonathan Graves entered. Grant felt the temperature drop inside his body. Graves walked down the aisle carrying the same slim leather folder he had brought to the divorce signing. He was not hurried. He never was. Men with fatal documents rarely need speed. Your Honor, Graves said, I represent North Star Capital Holdings, a secured creditor and rights holder in this matter. We object to the restructuring plan. Halpern stood sharply. On what basis? Graves handed documents to the clerk. On the basis that Sterling Vector does not own the foundational patents it proposes to license. Grant's ears began to ring. Halpern frowned. That is absurd. The patents were developed internally. With seed capital from Northstar Capital Holdings, Graves said. 12 years ago, Mr. Sterling signed a convertible intellectual property security agreement in exchange for $500,000 in emergency funding. Grant's hands went cold. $500,000. Year 2. Payroll week. He remembered the call from his then accountant. A miracle, the man had said. An anonymous private investor believed in the company. Grant had signed quickly. He had been desperate. He had not asked enough questions because desperate men call ropes lifelines, even when they are tied around the throat. Graves continued. The agreement granted Sterling Vector an exclusive royalty-free license to commercialize the technology, provided the company remained solvent, compliant, and under sound founder governance. Section 7 contains a reversion trigger. Upon bankruptcy filing caused by gross executive negligence, the license terminates and all derivative rights revert to Northstar. Halpern's face drained of color as he scanned the document. This predates my tenure, he whispered. Grant gripped the table. Who owns Northstar? Graves looked at him. You know. The judge leaned forward. For the record, Mr. Graves, Northstar Capital Holdings is wholly owned by Ashbourne Global. Its managing beneficiary is Miss Vivian Ashbourne. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Grant could not breathe. Vivian had not merely supported his company. She had held the floor beneath it. For 12 years he had stood on her foundation, called it his genius, decorated it with his name, and then offered her $10 million to disappear from the building she had saved before it had walls. Your Honor, Graves said, Miss Ashbourne has exercised the reversion trigger. Sterling Vector's license is terminated. The patents and derivative software rights return to Northstar immediately. Halpern sat down. He did not argue. That was when Grant knew it was over. The judge reviewed the filings for several long minutes. Every page sounded too loud as it turned. Finally, the gavel came down. Without the intellectual property rights identified as the foundation of the reorganization plan, Sterling Vector lacks viable assets to support Chapter 11 relief. The motion is denied. The case will convert to Chapter 7 liquidation. The gavel struck again. Grant Sterling lost the last thing he thought was his. After the hearing, he remained seated while lawyers gathered papers around him. Reporters waited outside. Creditors waited inside. There was nowhere to go that did not already know his name for the wrong reason. Graves approached the table. Grant looked up slowly. Did she come? He asked. No. The answer hurt more than he expected. Of course, Grant whispered. She doesn't need to see it. No, Graves said. She does not. Grant's eyes were hollow. Tell her I'm sorry. Graves studied him for a moment. Miss Ashbourne asked me to deliver a message if you made that request. Grant swallowed. What message? Graves closed the folder. She said an apology offered after consequence is often only grief for lost comfort. She hopes, one day, you learn the difference. Then Graves walked away. Grant sat alone at the table where his empire had been reduced to paper. Outside, cameras flashed for the man who had once lived for them. Chapter 9 Vivian did not celebrate Grant's ruin. That disappointed some people. There were investors who expected champagne. Reporters who wanted a quote sharp enough to become a headline. Old friends who thought she should laugh, because laughter would prove she had won. But Vivian had learned something during 12 years of quiet humiliation. Winning did not always feel like joy. Sometimes it felt like finally putting down a weight and realizing how deeply it had bruised your hands. 3 months after the liquidation ruling, Ashbourne Horizon opened its New York Innovation Center in the renovated shell of a former customs house near the harbor. Vivian chose the building herself. She liked that it had once existed to examine what entered and left a country. It felt appropriate. The lobby was bright, with limestone floors and tall windows facing the water. Engineers from Sterling Vector had been invited to apply before outside hiring began. Not the executives who had sneered at quiet women. Not the opportunists who had clapped for whoever stood closest to money. The builders. The coders. the operations teams, the people who had done real work while Grant performed genius on magazine covers. Lena Ortiz joined as chief operations officer. On her first day, she stood in Vivian's office, holding a signed contract, and looking as if she still could not quite believe the offer was real. "You know I worked for him," Lena said. "I know you worked for the company," Vivian replied. "There is a difference." Lena's mouth tightened with emotion. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Build well. I can do that. Then we understand each other." Camille Laurent applied too. Her application never reached Vivian's desk. Human Resources rejected it after confirming she had participated in coercive settlement planning, improper marital expense approvals, and misleading investor communications during the collapse. Camille sent one email to Graves threatening reputation damage. Graves replied with 4 attached documents and 1 sentence. "Proceed carefully." She did not write again. As for Grant, he disappeared from public life with less drama than he had lived it. The townhouse was sold. The jet was seized. The Forbes covers came down. Occasionally, a business blog ran a story about former founders who mistook valuation for value, and his name appeared halfway through, no longer a headline. Vivian saw one photograph of him 6 months later. He was leaving a courthouse in a plain navy suit, hair longer, face thinner, eyes lowered against the cameras. For a moment, she felt the ghost of the woman she had been reached toward the screen. Then she closed the article. Some doors did not need to be slammed. They only needed to remain closed. On the evening of the Innovation Center's opening, Malcolm Ashbourne found Vivian standing alone on the rooftop terrace, watching cargo lights move across the harbor. "You should be downstairs," he said. "They are waiting for a speech." "I know. You dislike speeches. I dislike empty ones." He joined her at the railing. For a while they watched the ships. "Do you regret it?" Malcolm asked. Vivian did not pretend to misunderstand. The marriage? The silence. She considered that. The easy answer was yes. She could have revealed herself earlier. She could have corrected every insult in the moment. She could have walked away the first time Grant made her feel like an accessory to his ambition. But life was rarely generous enough to become clear before it became painful. "I regret abandoning myself to preserve someone else's illusion," she said. "I do not regret loving him when he was worthy of love. That part of me was not foolish, it was sincere." Malcolm's expression softened. And now, Vivian looked through the glass doors at the people gathered below. Engineers, lawyers, operators, women from the new Ashbourne Foundation program that provided legal and financial support to spouses trapped behind powerful names. Survivors of polished rooms and quiet threats. People learning to own their voices before the world forced them to scream. "Now," she said, "I want to build things that do not require women to disappear in order for men to feel tall." When she stepped onto the stage 10 minutes later, the room quieted. Vivian looked out at the crowd. She did not think of Grant first. She thought of every version of herself that had stayed silent, because love felt holier than self-respect. She thought of every woman who had been called difficult for naming betrayal, dramatic for noticing cruelty, ungrateful for refusing crumbs. Then she smiled. "For years," Vivian said, "I believed loyalty meant standing behind someone, even when they stepped on my shadow. I was wrong. Loyalty without dignity is not love. It is erasure." No one moved. Ashbourne Horizon was created to connect the world more intelligently. But this building will also house something more personal. The Ashbourne Foundation will fund legal, financial, and professional resources for women rebuilding after coercive marriages, hidden abuse, and economic control. Applause began softly, then grew. Vivian waited for it to settle. "A woman does not become powerful because someone finally sees her," she said. "Sometimes she becomes powerful the moment she stops begging the wrong person to look." The room rose to its feet. Vivian stood beneath the lights, not as Grant Sterling's former wife, not as a discarded woman, not as the quiet figure at the edge of someone else's photograph. She stood as herself. And this time, no one else was sitting in her chair. Chapter 11. 1 year after the divorce, Vivian returned to the Langham Ballroom. The orchid wall was gone. The old Sterling Vector banner was gone. The stage where Grant had praised loyalty while Camille sat in her chair had been rebuilt for the Ashburn Foundation's annual report. Vivian stood alone near the entrance before guests arrived. For a moment, the empty room overlaid itself with memory. Camille in scarlet, Grant under white lights, the service door, the water glass steady in her hand, while something inside her finally accepted that love without respect had become a beautiful cage. Lena approached quietly. "Are you all right?" Vivian looked at the front row. Her name card sat at the center table. Vivian Ashbourne. No borrowed surname. No erased place. No mistress smiling over stolen linen. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The guests arrived in waves. Lawyers, engineers, shelter directors, financial counselors, former Sterling Vector employees, women starting over at 40, 50, 60. There were donors in diamonds and survivors in borrowed dresses. Vivian made no distinction in how she greeted them. At the end of the night, a young woman named Elise approached her near the stage. She was 26, with a nervous smile and a folder clutched against her chest. "Miss Ashbourne," Elise said. "You don't know me." "Then let's fix that," Vivian replied. Elise's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back with fierce discipline. "My husband used to tell everyone I was unstable. He controlled the accounts, the lease, even my phone. I watched your auction speech 3 times in a shelter office. The part about active verbs." Vivian's face softened. Elise held up the folder. "My divorce was finalized yesterday. I got my teaching license reinstated. The foundation lawyer said I should send a thank you note, but I wanted to say it myself." Vivian took both of Elise's hands. "You did the hard part. I was scared." "Of course you were. I still am." "That doesn't mean you're not free." Elise cried then, silently, with the startled embarrassment of someone unused to being allowed. Vivian held her hands until she steadied. Across the ballroom, Malcolm watched his daughter with an expression no shareholder report could have produced. Later, when the room emptied, Vivian walked once more to the side exit she had used on the night Grant moved her chair. She opened the door. The corridor beyond was ordinary. Beige walls, service carts, a faint smell of lemon cleaner. It looked smaller than she remembered. That too was a kind of healing. The places that once swallowed you become human-sized again when you stop kneeling inside the memory. Vivian closed the door and returned to the ballroom through the main entrance. The lights were still on. Her name card still waited at the center table. She picked it up, not because she needed proof, but because she wanted to remember the exact weight of a place no one else could give her or take from her again. Vivian Ashbourne. This time, she did not leave through the side door. Subscribe for more stories of silent strength, hidden truth, and the moment underestimated women take back their lives.